Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays, where I talk about unpopular or obscure champions in League of Legends, specifically within the most recent years. First place on the poll was Aurelion Sol, whom we've covered last video, so for this one we'll talk about the second most requested champion, Azir, the Emperor of the Sands. If this is your first time watching an episode in this series, I want to first start off with a disclaimer that my intent behind every episode of Why No One Plays is not to disparage or make fun of the champion in question or those who play them. Obviously people do play Azir, but only a very small portion of the player base. My goal with these videos is to raise more awareness of the champion by looking at them from the perspective of the general player base, breaking down possible reasons as to why they struggle to see much usage in solo queue and or pro play. I repeat, this is not a champion hate video, so please do not take this as a personal attack. And with that out of the way, let's go right into why no one plays Azir. Conceivably one of the most complex champions we've seen in League of Legends, Azir's design was far ahead of his time as he pushed the limits of what could be considered a battle mage and set a new precedent for the subclass, although the game recognized him as a specialist despite having many of the same properties as a battle mage. Azir's playstyle is all about control, asserting dominance over areas of the battlefield by commanding his soldiers to mark their territory. It's through these soldiers where Azir exerts all of his pressure, being unable to perform any action independent from them in a similar fashion to Orianna, but with a greater focus on position rather than usage. For Orianna, the key to mastering her is to figure out which action to be performing at what time, as she can use her ball to deal damage, support and defend her team, or attach to an ally to threaten enemies with her ultimate. For Azir, positioning is key for both him and his sand soldiers, as all of his abilities are designed almost like playing chess, moving your units to advantageous positions or keeping them away from disadvantageous positions. If we talk exclusively playstyle, Azir is definitely one of the most entertaining champions to play. The myriad of situations you'll face from one game to another is endless, making him really fun to pick up for just about anyone looking for a serious challenge because he never gets monotonous to play. All the same, as you know, a big part of my philosophy on video games, especially competitive games, is to find a proper balance between what is fun and what works, which is a quandary players and developers alike face almost all the time. Because sadly, more often than not, the most effective tactic available or meta may not be that fun, and vice versa, the most fun option can usually be inefficient in terms of performance. Almost every champion in Why No One Plays has a curse that will follow them for as long as they continue to exist. And Azir may just have the worst one, because he will never find that perfect balance. The notion that Azir is in the top 5 hardest champions to play in League is prevailing wisdom. His skill ceiling is practically endless. No matter how long you play him, you'll never be able to fully master him because there's so many things you can do in a fight. Granted, you cannot do all of those things at the same time, but that's why he's so hard to play. Not only does he demand the mechanics and reaction speed of a marksman, but the presence of mind to know what is the proper course of action to take out of the hundreds of possibilities is something you cannot just pick up after a couple matches. Azir has arguably the steepest initial time investment required out of any champion in the game. It takes hundreds of games to figure out how to play him, let alone the matchup experience that comes with learning any champion. And while it's possible to get the hang of his basic mechanics through maybe half an hour in a custom game, the only way to master Azir is trial by fire, by queuing up for ranked games and learning the hard way. Now before anyone types in the comments, no, playing him in PvE, ARAM, or normals does not count as actual practice because the player mentality in a ranked versus normals game is vastly different. Naturally, that means the average player will lose many more games than they will win, which means to pick up Azir for most players, it comes at the risk of demoting from your rank perhaps a full division. A cost very few, if any, have the patience for or are willing to endure without damaging their pride. Ironically, he's one of the best high elo champions as there are a lot of masters, grandmasters, and challengers who make great use of him, but the reason why he's very rarely fielded is not because of bad teammates or low skill level relative to other champions. Not to call anyone out per se, but diamond, platinum, and even gold players do not want to sacrifice their rank just to learn a champion. It's too much work and it just doesn't feel good. In their defense, that mentality is not unjustified. Azir does take far too much work than the average person believes is worth their time and energy, but then again, challengers aren't the average person because they're either gifted or crazy enough to pull it off. Azir is one of those cases where he's intentionally meant to be really hard to play, which is neither a good thing nor a bad thing objectively speaking. But since we're talking about pick popularity, it's the most defining factor for why he'll never see higher than maybe a 1-2% pick rate unless made significantly more powerful than his competition. That cannot ever happen for him, unfortunately, as the more ways you can outplay your opponent exists, the more versatile they are and the stronger they become. In League of Legends, a champion's strength is not just defined by how good their numbers are, as someone could have very strong base stats, high ratios on their abilities, but still be considered a weak champion. Conversely, a champion with low base stats and numbers can be very strong because of what they do with them. So there are two balancing metrics that you have to take into consideration. Thing is, champions who have a ton of tricks up their sleeves require advanced skill and mechanics to play, and the main purpose of those base numbers is to enable a champion to pull those tricks off. That's why statistic champions like Garen, Udyr, and Tryndamere have such high numbers on their abilities because they don't have too many tricks, so they have to be naturally overtuned to make up for it. Similar to Kalista, because Azir can do so much in a game, especially during teamfights, he has to be kept permanently weak in order to prevent him from overperforming, requiring players to make up for the difference by outplaying their opponent. But that creates an unhealthy dynamic where trying to play him often punishes you more than it rewards. Even tiny mistakes, such as an error in where you position your soldiers, can be the difference between winning and losing a fight. You might tunnel vision on someone with low health, launching all your sand soldiers to them in an effort to finish them off, and then realize you not only took your eyes off your king piece, but stripped yourself of all his defenses, at which point a LeBlanc or Kha'Zix waiting patiently for your guards to be out of the picture can assassinate you. Of course, Azir does have defensive tools up his sleeve. Emperor's Divide summons a phalanx to create a solid formation blocking off enemy pursuers. This ability can be used as both engage and disengage, so I'm not necessarily saying he's completely defenseless without his troops. However, in this day and age where champions have a billion dashes, one wall won't be enough to keep assailants off of you. What's funny is that Azir's wall used to prevent enemy champions from dashing through it, similar to Poppy's steadfast presence, but they took that away when they realized it was simply too broken. Azir had to have a ton of things stripped from his kit because it was too overloaded, and even with all that, he still is. His other defensive tool is Shifting Sands, which gives him a shield and has him dash to one of his sand soldiers, allowing you to quickly get close to your men if you're being engaged on. However, it has a very long cooldown for a dash. Careless usage of this ability will leave you wide open, again, making his margin for error very tight. It's difficult to enjoy playing a champion who severely penalizes you for even the smallest of miscalculations, but Azir has to be kept that way so as not to spiral out of control, creating a champion that would only attract the most hardcore of players, which makes up perhaps only 1% of the entire player population. Credit where it's due though, unlike Kalista, Azir's gameplay is not fundamentally broken. In fact, it's quite reasonable and honest, and it feels good to play. It's just a byproduct of being a high skill champion with near infinite potential for outplay. But the blade cuts both ways. While Riot has been toiling to not make Azir too oppressive to deal with by slowing down his rate of scaling, they've also been balancing games to end much sooner, to the point where the average game length in recent seasons has been about 25 to 27 minutes. During that time, even if you had decent stats, you can only pick up about 3 to 4 items max. Whereas back in the days of Season 5 and 6, where game times were the highest, you would routinely see games where everyone reached 5 items or full builds, where Azir shines best. And that was also during the time where Azir's pick rate was at its highest. The fact of the matter is that Azir takes far too long to get going. Not saying he's irrelevant in games under 40 minutes, but until you start building attack speed, cooldown reduction, and high amounts of ability power, Azir can't easily perform optimally during the mid-game, where burst matters far more than DPS, and that's also why a lot of AD carries like Caitlyn, Tristana, and Jinx suffer in the mid-game, because 2 marksman items statistically are weaker than 2 AD bruiser items, 2 tank items, or 2 mage items. And our Shuriman Chicken is for all intents and purposes an AD carry who just does magic damage, and so he comes with the strengths and weaknesses of one. But unique to him, mage items aren't itemized for attack speed aside from Nashor's Tooth, and because Azir can't critically strike or deal on-hit effects, he loses out on both crit chance power spikes and on-hit modifiers. For example, he can't build Lichbane, meaning his only source of scaling is attack speed and ability power. While he comes with a reasonably good laning phase, mid-game can be excruciating for him. Baron used to only be doable around 30 minutes, but ever since Riot made him weaker, a lot of teams can take him down right as he spawns. Dragon Souls can be obtained as early as 22 minutes, meaning Elder Dragon's game-winning pressure will be a threat on the map at 27 to 28, around the time where most players are working towards their second to last item. This puts Azir in a race against the clock, as he now has to contend with an increasingly fast-paced League of Legends, with most champions being equipped to thrive in the mid-game while he cannot, at least not to the same level. For example, other quote-unquote late-game champions like Kassadin and Vayne used to be very weak up until they were about level 16 and had 4 items, which made them a very risky champion to pick in solo queue. But through changes to items and their own abilities, Kassadin's curve has been flattened a bit more, to the point where he can reach that hypercarry power spike by as early as level 13, while Vayne can already start 3-shotting tanks and bruisers with 2 items and boots. someone I covered a while ago, Anivia, faced a similar issue of simply taking too long to get going, but during preseason, Riot buffed her to be a terrifying presence in the mid-game. And not just older champions, almost every new champion released in the past 2 years is mid-game oriented, reaching their power spikes with 2 or 3 items. To my knowledge, the last late-game centric champion to release was Kindred, who themselves have been also reworked to function best in the mid-game. Azir stands as one of the last remaining hyper carries in an environment that's making it more and more difficult for him to reach that point. This strains the margin for error even further, as players have to make up that difference as well. So not only do you have to play Azir really well just to make up his skill floor, but you also have to play really well to cover the fact that you're at a constant disadvantage through sheer numbers alone. Other champions like Kindred, Gangplank, and Aurelion Sol are difficult to play but can usually hold their own at all stages of the game, meaning the only challenge the player has to face is simply understand what their champions can and cannot do. In Azir's case, he's not only harder than all of them, but starts off with a handicap. And despite all those reasons, that's actually not enough to deter players from picking up Azir. After all, games exist to challenge us, to push us to our limits. The straw that breaks the camel's back for Azir most of the time is that he's incredibly unstable. Choosing him as your main is almost the same as living in a house of cards. Things may be fine now, they may even improve, but at any point your champion might completely collapse on itself the moment Riot sees him too often in professional play. A small buff or two is enough to propel Azir from irrelevant to god tier status pick or ban, which usually means you'll be seeing him nerfed to the ground within a patch or two. I'm not saying popular champions are never buffed or nerfed, but when they are, they're usually just small nudges in either direction to keep them in line. The overall experience when playing a champion doesn't change to make them unrecognizable. Lucian can be nerfed several times over, but in the end he's still Lucian. He still has a very strong mid-game and a high skill ceiling. Practically speaking, it's far from a good idea to designate someone like Azir as a main because he's just not sustainable, let alone the mountain of other hurdles you have to overcome with this guy. And if we compare him to another battle mage like Anivia or Swain with a much lower skill ceiling and equal if not more pressure in a teamfight, who also remains consistently powerful, and it's understandable why they don't want to go that far. Azir is sort of those challenge runs that people impose on themselves in games like Pokemon such as Nuzlocke, while activating every difficulty flag to make it even harder, things like no items, no Pokemon centers, no TMs, etc. He basically only exists for the super try-hard players. I don't mean that as an insult by the way, it's really just that. For the majority of non-Azir players, he may just be a very fun champion to screw around once in a while in ARAM, but he's not that efficient in ranked, which in turn breaks the balance of fun and efficiency, because when it comes to competitive ranked games, a lot of players are willing to sacrifice a little bit of fun so long as it means they can win more games. That being said, Azir himself has a fantastic design. I stand by what I said earlier, that he has some of the most colorful gameplay in all of League of Legends. Very clear strengths and very clear weaknesses. While he may never become a staple mid laner for as long as he lives, he's not supposed to be. No one really looks at Azir and goes, wow, he's such a dumb champion, because you have to be very good to play him well. He doesn't have any frustrating mechanics such as Akali's Shroud or Jax's Counter-Strike. No cheese mechanics like on target ability, % max health true damage, or stealth. Just like in a game of chess, he beats you in the most conventional way possible. Thanks to everyone who watched all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to support my channel, best way you can do so is like the video, leave a comment, share this video with your friends, and subscribe. If there is a champion I haven't covered on either why no one plays or why everyone plays that you would like to see really badly, consider making a donation to my Patreon page, as patrons can put in a request for a specific champion to cut the line. Aside from that, all links to my other platforms and social medias can be found in the description below, and don't forget to check out my other episodes on why no one plays. There is a playlist for that as well. But thank you all so much for watching this episode, and I hope to see you again soon for the next one. Take care.